Hello, everyone, and welcome to what I think is going to be a historic podcast. Today, I have with me Christian Darnton. He needs no introduction in the community, but what you guys maybe don't know is the last time I did a podcast with him, it didn't take very long for Palantir to go up 28x. Christian is a longtime Palantir shareholder, and so am I, but he was a critical influence in me buying. For a long time, I was studying the company, and Christian was DMing me saying, "Have you bought yet? Have you bought yet?" Eventually, I bought. Christian was a massive influence. So, Christian, what a joy to do this podcast today with you.
It's so great to be back. We haven't spoken for many years now, face to face on Zoom like this. But yeah, I mean, it's been an exceptional ride when you think about it. All of the early Palantir investors were totally spot on. And I personally think, especially with Duolingo, the same will happen today. So I'm super happy to be here, super excited to speak with you. And yeah, I think this is going to be historic. So let's see.
Amazing. Same. I think this is going to be cool to watch in a few years' time. Okay, so today, the stock price has been going down quite fast for over 6 months now. And I'll tell you the way I'm thinking about it, which is if this stock can go to $1, for example, with just a $20,000 purchase, that would get me 20,000 shares. At the previous high, which I think the stock could get back to relatively easily, if the company indeed doesn't die, those 20,000 shares would be equivalent to having invested $10 million at $500 per share. So I think what's interesting is when you look at these hyper-growth companies, the opportunity to generate astounding wealth takes on this very counterintuitive shape.
Yeah.
When you have a machine that's increasing free cash flow per share exponentially, and then the stock price declines exponentially too, you have this massive slingshot opportunity bubbling to the surface, which I think I'm really excited about. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So Duolingo, I first invested at $2.40 a share. That was my first position. And ever since I've been increasing my position, and I can explain kind of how I'm thinking about the business. I do think with Duolingo, there is a unique number of misconceptions about the business, primarily because it's an education company. There are countless misconceptions around the TAM, for instance, being small, and therefore the inability for Duolingo to penetrate that market specifically, at least to a degree that you've been suggesting, that I've been suggesting. And I frankly just think that is wrong. And we can discuss those in one moment. But what I really see with Duolingo is an outstanding management team and organizational characteristics, I think is how you describe it. I've never come to conviction as quickly as I had with Duolingo. And it's primarily because when I was reading the transcript, it was extraordinarily obvious that the CEO, Luis, he almost imitates the same features that you see in the early days of Amazon, and kind of the whole way I think about investing in a company that you've massively influenced as well is kind of a 3-part pillar that I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on. So the first pillar is basically that exceptional businesses exist, and from that, those businesses obviously share a set of underlying traits and patterns that parallel across all of those businesses. And the job of an investor really is to understand those patterns and traits and see those actualized in a business. And when it comes to Duolingo, one of the most striking traits and patterns that I see is that of iteration and experimentation. The exact same playbook and framework that was used really by Bezos in the early days of Amazon. And I have an analogy that I like to use about a hot bubbling stew. I don't know if you know it, if I've explained it in the past. But it's and the COO of Palantir actually liked the tweet and when I was explaining it. But when you have an organization that iterates and experiments to such a degree as in the case of Duolingo and or Amazon, for instance, Palantir is a great example of this. The inevitable output is something that emerges from the underlying structure that cannot be anticipated with specificity beforehand, but can be known directionally. And I think that is what we will see with Duolingo in the coming years, in the coming decades. We saw it so clearly with Palantir. Their AIP product, for instance, nobody predicted that with specificity. Not one person said, in 2 years on this date, this product will emerge and it will transform the business. However, you could have known this directionally based upon those traits that were evident beforehand. And so, without getting into too much detail here, I think that Duolingo has so many outstanding organizational characteristics and traits that basically just mirror the same playbook that Jeff Bezos has utilized in the early days of Amazon. And that is what really struck out to me. And so I could really speak about Duolingo all day, but yeah, I'm just interested what you think about that.
So what was very striking to me, the kind of aha moment when I knew that I was looking at a machine that iterates very fast,
Yeah.
is that one instance that you can actually see in a graph if I pop it up. I'm going to try and bring it up on the screen while I'll
Okay.
explain. There's an instance in 2021 where DAO growth, so daily active user growth, plummeted to nearly zero. And
Yeah.
someone in the community actually pointed out that it went below zero. Sometimes there's errors when it comes to plots on these platforms that we use. But if oh no, this software isn't working right now. So I'm going to try and bring out this graph. Point is, this company has a history of DAO growth being lumpy. As is the case with any of these businesses, the user base doesn't grow in a straight line. And as you say, it's a result of insane iteration and focus. And then no one knows what comes out. So you can see there, this curve is basically daily active user growth. And then this is total daily active users, the bar chart. And you can see how in 2021 it plummeted. And so the story is very interesting. They decided to focus on that. This company has a bunch of priorities, which is basically user growth, teaching quality, and then monetization. And as you know, they can't focus on everything all at the same time. So this happened, and that forced them to focus on user growth. You can see how just 2 quarters ago, daily active users were growing at 61.5% year over year, plummeted to zero. Then once again, you can see how the growth reaccelerated. So what happened here is they actually found a metric which they realized per their data science that if they were able to increase that by a certain amount, DAO growth would increase by a proportional amount. And so they figured, well, if we push this really far, we can now get amazing DAO growth. And that's what they did. And they increased that metric in a whole bunch of counterintuitive ways, which no one could have really predicted. But just by iterating every day and running experiments, they did it. And so that's why when I look at this declining DAO growth, which the market interprets as a sort of unmistakable sign of disruption, it's really just a cyclical part of the business.
Yeah.
They're coming off very fast growth, and now they're focusing on teaching quality with the onset of AI and stuff. But you can see how, anyways, regardless of the cyclicality of the DAO growth year over year, in absolute terms, the user base is up a lot, and it's still trending up. So to me, that's a sort of quantitative illustration of what you're saying, I believe also is qualitatively true. And as a shareholder, I sleep very well at night knowing these guys are just iterating in a way which I think would be possibly too painful for the average person.
Well, this is the exact thing, because there are so many instances, and I go back to the Amazon case because I do think it's so important for investors to understand. When Bezos specifically emphasized goodwill over the long term in comparison to appealing to short-term Wall Street desires. Now, if you look at many investors today, and this is certainly not an insult, it's just my honest observation, many, I think, would have missed that subtle insight and trait, primarily because they were so obsessed with quarterly short-term reports. In the case of Duolingo, one of the things that I found so interesting, alongside many, is an interview with the co-founder, Mr. Hacker, his name is. And he was speaking about how Duolingo especially, yeah, exactly. He especially, the CEO at the time of IPO, he drew on the whiteboard, Antonio, and he put a dot on the screen on the whiteboard and basically drew out the history of the company to date, but also extrapolating to the future. And he said in the interview that the reason we did that is because the IPO was not the pinnacle of the company. The IPO was not the highest point of the business, and they still have, they believe, so much more to go. And so I think people really misunderappreciate not only the vision and the ambition of Duolingo when it comes to their future business, but also the staggering long-term vision. And the CEO has explicitly said as well that this is in their words, 100-year company that they're building. And so for me personally as a shareholder, this is exactly what I want to hear. I am not concerned about monetization in the short term. I could not care less about Wall Street demands and these quarterly figures. Of course, those are important data points. However, what I'm really looking for is, as Bezos says, what is good for the for the customer eventually translates into what is good for the stakeholder, for the shareholder, but over the long term. And many people seem to not understand that. And so with Duolingo, I think as they improve the efficacy of teaching and learning on the platform, catalyzed through AI, which is a very unique moment in the company's history, they truly can become the best tutor in the world. And the valuation of that is certainly magnitudes higher than this current price. And I believe, once again, they're likely to do so. And yeah, I think in terms of the misconceptions, in the West, we have this belief that education is almost this trivial thing that isn't a necessity or doesn't meaningfully improve your life in much capacity. And I think that's especially true in the university context. But what people fail to understand is that, especially when it comes to 80% of the world, many developing and underdeveloped countries, the difference between learning English and math and not is absolutely huge. And we have this cognitive bias, I think, as investors in the West, against understanding the true importance of education. And it's not necessarily just a trivial good, but rather actually is an absolute necessity for truly transforming your life. And so the case with Duolingo is so fascinating because not only do you have a decreasing stock price, but quantitatively you also have fantastic figures that are almost indisputable. But you similarly have these broad misconceptions around the business that seem to massively sway investor sentiment. And so for me, that's a perfect mixture of opportunity.
What was the aha moment for you when you were studying Duolingo in terms of, I now believe I'm in front of an sort of, Bezos playbook instance?
Yeah, it was very, very quick. It was in I forget which specific report I was reading, but I read through the transcripts and I kept noticing this absolute insistence with experimentation and iteration and A/B testing. And from that instantly piqued my curiosity. And just through purely reading the transcripts, I felt as if I had stumbled across an outstanding business. And so that was truly the aha point for me. I didn't necessarily come across it quantitatively, but rather it was much more so a qualitative lens and the realization that this was an instance of the Bezos playbook, basically.
Right. That's very interesting. So I was just casting my mind back to a deep dive I did on Nike at some point last year. And it was very interesting to see when they brought on the new CEO, the guy was saying all the right things about, we're focused on sports, aligned around innovation, so forth. They have this bucket of expenses in their income statement called demand creation expenses. And I'm just going to share the graph now on the screen. I have it here. Fortunately, don't have to look for it like the other one. And the audience here can see what happened to demand creation expenses as a percentage of revenue after the pandemic, basically, after the new CEO stepped up. Basically ticked down to levels that the company hadn't seen historically for a long time. And for some time, analysts truly loved this. And actually financial performance was coming in. So financially, the company was doing well. But then we all know what happened to Nike, which is it lost relevance. And so Nike is an instance of the antithesis of what Luis is doing now, was an instance, which is pleasing the market in the short term and prioritizing short-term financial performance over long-term value creation.
Yeah.
Now, the Nike example I found fascinating because it's such a powerful brand. Me as a millennial, I'm still very much loyal to Nike. And I think there's a lot of brand value, but it's incredible. If you look at the financial metrics, how much they tanked the actual value, the financial productive capacity of this company. Now, there's a bunch of examples in the near term, which we've seen, which are very similar to Netflix. Sorry, to Duolingo. And one of them is, as I was saying, Netflix in 2022. Then we have Zuckerberg increasing CapEx also in 2022. Amazon with their latest CapEx cycle in 2022, which I believe is now happening again. I'm yet to review the earnings report. So it's this archetypal thing that happens all the time, which is managers get punished in the short term for taking on short-term financial pain in the pursuit of long-term value creation, which is what equates to a business doing well. And sometimes they do get rewarded for doing the opposite. Although in Nike's case, you can see, if you read the quarterly earnings call transcripts, you can see analysts sort of not buying the story completely. And then the stock not doing very well as well. So it's like, I think great managers take on short-term financial pain.
Yeah, I totally agree. There are a few notes that I had down there. There was one, when I was researching Duolingo recently, I've been listening to all of the interviews with the CEO, and he did admit on one occasion adding multiple advertisements after each lesson, more than they were doing at the time. And he did that specifically on a one-off basis because they were concerned about not meeting near-term Wall Street metrics. He explains in the interview how this, he believes, is his biggest mistake he's ever made as a leader, and he basically pledged to never make that mistake again. And so I see here just profound intellectual honesty, once again a total disregard for short-term concerns by Wall Street and many investors, frankly. And whether it comes to Alex Karp or Lisa Su, all of these figures have in the past made contrarian bets that have diverged from consensus, of which is the only path towards truly asymmetric outcomes. I mean, it's almost definitional. You have to be slightly contrarian in some regard, whether that's investing, whether that's building a company, in order to truly generate those asymmetric outcomes. And so it's an outstanding business. A few of the points that I was just thinking about, what I noticed about Duolingo is that they have one of the lowest churn rates in Silicon Valley on a talent basis. And that is so important because if you, as you've described in the past, consider an organization at the core simply being the collection of individuals that are organized towards a set goal, the caliber and the caliber and the strength and of those underlying individuals is so important insofar as it comes to their long-term success. And so we see an extraordinarily strong organizational culture as well as an organizational structure that mirrors that of Palantir. So the lowest churn rate in Silicon Valley when it comes to talent and those that leave. And that is one of the commonalities, I think, across my investments and I think yours as well. Having an organization that has that extraordinarily strong and long-term mission that truly is disruptive and exciting, and it attracts the best talent. And I think we saw that most evidently in the case of Palantir, when a 20-year-old company that was still attracting the best talent in the world. And so all of the signals really are positive for me when it comes to Duolingo. I think probably as an investor, the thing people need to get over is the cognitive bias against education that we have in the West. But from an organizational properties front, all of these organizational traits were exceptional, and they are in strength as well. You know, you mentioned in the Nike case, and I haven't done a deep dive on Nike, to be totally honest with you. However, it is the case, and some of my friends have said this to me, you know, how do you distinguish between a CEO that uses buzzwords and you know, truly identifying those traits that are actually important, they're causally linked to increased rates of free cash flow per share over the long term? And I think in some sense, it's, as you've described, much more of a subconscious process. And you really have to kind of study a lot of businesses to truly understand which ones are actually exceptional. But I also think in the case of Duolingo, these traits, whether it's experimentation, iteration, long-term thinking, talent density, innovation stack, all of these different traits, they are in such strong and clear strength. And this is one of the most striking things about Amazon as well. There is as an investor, you don't have to infer much based upon what Jeff Bezos was saying to understand the point he was making. It's not like you have to make a radical extrapolation. He explicitly says, we are focusing upon the long term. He explicitly says, we are focusing upon free cash flow per share as the North Star. He explicitly says, we will conduct thousands of experiments a year. 99% of those will fail, but the one or two experiments that actually succeed may transform the business. And I just see the same in Duolingo. It requires very little extrapolation or inference, but rather he is just putting the cards all on the table. And that is one of the things that I really think truly distinguishes great businesses from very mediocre ones, because there are so many okay businesses in the market. I think there are very few truly exceptional ones. And in my case, from what I've noticed, the exceptional ones make it extraordinarily clear. So yeah, one other thing I would say, and this also relates to other investments, especially in the case of HIMSS, but also Duolingo today, it is inevitable as an investor that there are these outstanding debates that will arise in the market. It is inevitability, whether you're investing in Costco or Google or Spotify, whatever the company is, there are always outstanding debates that emerge. And therefore, the way to think about an investment in light of that fact is assessing as to if this organization has the traits and the caliber to overcome this specific problem with increasing speed and efficacy. And I think you can deduce that from looking at their history. The example you cited about their user slowdown and how they overcame that issue. And so in the case of Duolingo, in the case of HIMSS and the other companies we can discuss, I see very clearly an organization that has the ability to overcome difficult problems with increasing speed and efficacy. And that truly is what defines an exceptional business, at least from a very abstract level. So I'm personally buying much more.
So am I. So I think that, as you were saying, the idea of spotting a company that's extraordinary, I think it's, as you were saying, it's a combination of qualitative and quantitative data points. And one that I love on the quantitative data side is the free cash flow margin.
Yeah.
And this is a really interesting metric that I know you have many outstanding videos and write-ups. And I think some of the best work you've done over the past year is discussing the bear thesis for these companies.
Yeah.
So the one thing that I haven't seen the bears outline just yet is, why does Duolingo have a free cash flow margin which is in the ballpark of NVIDIA and Palantir? To me, that's truly extraordinary. And then the other thing that's striking, so it's sorry for the legend. Here we go. So the blue line is Duolingo, the orange line is Palantir, and the purple line is NVIDIA. So NVIDIA has been relatively high up, perhaps less so in 2023 because of CapEx and stuff. But what's very interesting is obviously Palantir deep in the negative territory, which is back in the day we were looking at this company and so forth. But you can see how Duolingo's free cash flow margin accelerates dramatically with the onset of the LLM revolution. In the year 2021, it was 2.2%. Just 2 years earlier, it was minus 2.3%. Going into towards the end of 2022, which is when LLMs came along, 13%, then 28.3%, then 36.5%, which is only just under Palantir last quarter. We don't know what it's going to look like in this quarter, and then just underneath NVIDIA. So to me, the idea of free cash flow per share, which I obviously borrowed from Jeff Bezos, is for free cash flow per share to go up a lot, the business has to solve a lot of problems for customers to bring a lot of revenue, and they have to do it in a way which is highly leveraged and very difficult to replicate. So then you bring all of that, or a lot of that, to the bottom line. So to me, the ultimate measure of to what extent does a business satisfy that equation is free cash flow per share, and then free cash flow margin tells you exactly. I mean, these guys are bringing nearly 40% of the money they bring to the bottom line, which is what is to shareholders. And what's interesting is you can see the acceleration since the onset of LLMs. And the thesis is, well, LLMs are killing the business. It wouldn't seem like it.
I totally agree. On that point, that's a really good point you make, because one of the comments that people make, not necessarily criticisms, but a lot of the feedback I hear about when you discuss the qualitative traits, for instance, of a business, is I think they often come across as overly abstract. When you're talking about experimentation, when you're talking about, and I'm not saying you specifically, I'm just saying generally, when one speaks about these qualitative traits, I think they can come across as fairly abstract sometimes. But the important point that I like to reiterate is that those qualitative traits are, in some true sense, causally linked to increased rates of free cash flow per share probabilistically over the long term. And just one example that I was speaking to a friend about, internal experimentation and iteration. Why is it the case that fundamentally quantitatively improves the business over the long term? And it's because, well, if you have a culture, an organization that consistently experiments and iterates, they will stumble across points of failure at a much faster rate. They will, they will figure out early potential, as Jeff Bezos describes, seeds of which can be blossomed and later bloom into a huge, into a cash flow machine, basically. And so these traits are also very tangible. And I like to frame it as them being, in some sense, causally linked probabilistically to increased rates of free cash flow per share. And that really just, I think that view stems from treating a stock not as a ticker symbol, but rather actually as a real organization that exists in the real world. And thus you have to evaluate the business based upon that qualitative lens, at least to some degree. And so that's the point I wanted to mention, because I sometimes think that maybe the way I speak about these things can come across as too abstract or in some sense almost seem irrelevant when you're talking about these traits. But I truly do think they are causally linked probabilistically to increased rates of free cash flow per share over the long term. The same is true with long-termism. The same is true with talent. The same is true with innovation nursery. All of these other different frameworks and traits are causally linked probabilistically to increased rates of free cash flow per share. And yeah, just going on to your second point as well about AI. It is really strange because you tweeted about this, I think today actually. You were saying that the market equally does not believe in artificial intelligence, but on the same token believes that it's, it's kind of the most disruptive thing. And so there's almost a paradox here. I think that Duolingo and AI, there is absolutely no quantitative evidence that tells me that this is a business that is on the verge of disruption. Absolutely none. And in fact, I think to the contrary, you can see evidence that actually it's a huge accelerant. Whether it's the famous stat that in the first 12 years of the business, they only created 100-odd courses, and within the month of, or within the year of 2025, they managed to make over 150 new courses. That is just one data point that suggests that this truly is transformative. And so I also think I've been using Claude Code over the past few weeks, and it's very clear to see that obviously it's a powerful tool. Many are concerned about the ability to imitate Duolingo at ease. And I think one of the most interesting insights from the CEO here is that many people seem to really underappreciate the sophistication of Duolingo behind the surface. It comes across as this childish, fun app that has no sophistication, but rather could be imitated within a few minutes by your kind of grandmother next door or something. And this is just totally asinine, as Charlie Munger would say. That the true moat lives in those tiny pain points of which they've solved over the past decade, of which are now subtly actualized in the product. And I had a tweet about this as well. I'm not sure if you've come across Naval, right? The philosopher, Silicon Valley.
Big inspiration.
He speaks about this concept of specific knowledge in life. And so his framework is, if you wish to make money, etc., then you have to do so through arriving upon specific knowledge. Peter Thiel calls this a secret. And the only way you can come across that specific knowledge is not through school, it's not through a book per se, it's through lived experience and actually trying to solve a problem or doing something in the real world. And one of the interesting things with LLMs is I think the data is very clear that they diverge to the consensus. They diverge to the consensus, and that is based upon how the LLMs are trained to predict the next token in the sequence based upon the corpus of data that is available on the internet. And the point that I want to make here is that the specific knowledge, the secret that Duolingo has is really that education at the core is not about access to information, but rather education at the core is about a sustained behavioral change over time. That is truly what education is. I mean, we have an abundance of information today on the internet, but that does not necessarily equate to further education or intelligence. What really Duolingo has cracked is these very subtle pain points that they've uniquely stumbled across over the past 2 decades or decade and a bit, from which are now very subtly actualized in their product. And I think the same, it's not a great comparison to use Palantir here, but what is the real value of Palantir's software? Is it the code? Well, I think what is subtly ingrained in the code is those tiny pain points that they've solved from being on the battlefield and in commercial contexts. And that is just not something you can imitate with ease. And so I think that the same is true with Duolingo here. And just from personal experience, I've been using Duolingo now for a month. I think it's absolutely outstanding. And I had many misconceptions before coming into this company and getting on the app. And I'm outstanded by the capacity of Duolingo to learn. And of course, there's a tension here between gamification, but also teaching and learning efficacy. And I think that's a balance they've struck very well. And so just to wrap up, my conclusion from using Duolingo over the past month or so has really been that this is an extraordinarily difficult problem that they're solving. And merely prompting a language model or something is absolutely not sufficient for education and for disrupting that market. And it ties back to what I said before. I think the secret Duolingo have stumbled across is that education at the core is not about access to information. Education at the core is about sustained behavioral change over time. And from that secret, they've implemented these very nuanced features that have once again stacked up over time, as you would say, from which compound into a vastly superior product for those that look under the surface. And so, yeah, I'm extraordinarily excited. And I think that many investors just are not thinking about it too deeply. And I think the framework of the secret and understanding their specific knowledge that they have, namely that education is about sustained behavioral change, is very important for this thesis and for this discussion. And I just don't believe that can be imitated really with ease at all.
So I think just to crystallize everything you've said for the audience, because there's a lot of knowledge, wisdom, and information in there. It's basically when you have a company with truly extraordinary organizational properties, they iterate, focus on the customer, perform all these little actions, which then amount into a relatively higher customer satisfaction, which then unleashes network effects, which then generates a proprietary data moat. So they get access to a data which no one else has in terms of scale and quality. And then that's what actually turns AI into a tailwind, because a generic AI is always going to be slightly behind a generic AI plus proprietary data. So the combination of those two things is always going to be front running generic AI capabilities. That's basically what you're saying. And so on that basis, I want to ask you a question, which is the best Duolingo bear thesis have you seen? And if the answer is they all fundamentally misunderstand how a company creates value nowadays, that's fair enough too. But I'm just interested if you've seen one that's actually worthwhile.
But before I get to that, you mentioned when you were speaking there, a thought arose, which was extrapolation. And I think there is I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I think there's a skill in learning to extrapolate accurately based upon the evidence that is available. And in the case of Duolingo especially, so many people cannot even imagine the possibility of this truly disrupting the education industry, primarily because they're looking at this app that looks childish, it looks gamified, and some of the feedback is that it's not effective at learning. One of the things, and this ties back to the analogy, it's probably my favorite analogy I've kind of come up with. If you have a stew, a hot bubbling stew, all the ingredients are primed perfectly. The taste, the temperature, the time, inevitably something will emerge from that underlying structure. And the same is exactly true in the case of a business. All of those variables that are primed perfectly, inevitably an emergent feature of those traits is either a change in strategy, a product, a feature from which transforms the whole. And the best evidence for that was in the case of Palantir. And so the reason I mention that again is because I don't know the specific feature, the specific product, the language model. I don't know what Duolingo will come up with, but I do believe it is directionally knowable that they will produce a feature, a product, something of that nature from which will truly disrupt the education industry. And I think, it's very difficult to extrapolate because some people think you're totally crazy, but it's that's kind of how I'm thinking about the business. And so, I mean, one of my articles I wrote and looked through AI, and there was this case of Khan Academy, and they were trialing ChatGPT, and there was this student sitting down on the table, and this laptop was next to him, and it was looking at the math work he was doing on paper, and it was basically guiding him through it. Something like that is truly transformative, and maybe Duolingo will make a feature like that in some capacity. But once again, I return to the fact that the co-founder, Mr. Hacker, has explicitly said they are 1% into their vision. They have a remaining 99% to go. They've barely even gotten started, and the market is pricing this as if it's kind of in catastrophic decline. And so, sorry.
No, please finish. I was just going to add to what you were saying, just some additional thoughts to that.
No, that was all. I was just going to move on to the bare thesis, but I just wanted to explain that.
Oh, the bare thesis. Well, I just wanted to add to that the idea of a proprietary data mode flywheel. I don't think, I mean, given the current technological paradigm that we have, I don't really see a foreseeable end to a flywheel of the sort, meaning
Yeah,
humanity could just be deploying more compute for 500 years. And
yeah,
then along the way, so long as we have a similar technological paradigm, which is these things learn to automate things based on data, this could truly be a 100-year company. And it's quite interesting, adding to your idea of extrapolation. Something I think many people are not paying attention to is the chess vertical. So
yeah,
Louis said this many times, but it was two guys who didn't know how to play chess, no coding experience. They made the MVP and scaled it up a little bit, and now it's the fastest growing vertical. So if you understand Duolingo as a singularity scaler, which is I mean, fundamentally, capacity to create value goes up in tandem with AI scaling laws. We saw that happen with chess. There's no reason why in 5 years you can't just prompt it with natural language and say, "Hey, I want a course on Egyptology right now, and
yeah,
I want to take it this far, or I want to learn Mandarin with this accent, or I want to learn maths, but like this school of philosophy, or just anything." I think basically they're building an education ontology, which
yeah,
is we're seeing with Palantir as it gets bigger, um, it grows faster. And that's because an ontology, which is an exhaustive information set which maps physical reality, combined with LLM technology, is just so mind boggling. And value creation abilities go up non-linearly. So that is what I
yeah,
think, adding to what you were saying in terms of extrapolation, that's usually where the 100x thesis kind of thing comes along.
yeah.
And we'll discuss hymns next after you tell us
Sure.
about the bare thesis. But that's sort of the idea of extrapolation, just to crystallize that for
Yeah,
everyone.
and the final thing I will say is that just as in healthcare, we're moving into this proactive and personalized field. The exact same true is happening in education. We're
Yeah.
moving away from reactive and generic. And the final thing I'll mention is that the reason I'm so passionate and excited about Duolingo is because I personally had a terrible time in the education system. It didn't work for me. I was much better just reading and being left alone instead of this Prussian style education system. And so that passion basically has now crystallized in the thesis, which is why I invested in the business. It aligns perfectly. And so for investors out there, it's really, I think, a lot of the time about following your curiosity and interest. And I would say probably uh, my interest is much more around education than healthcare. Healthcare is still up there. But yeah, that's one thing I wanted to mention. In terms of the bed cases, to be totally frank with you, Antonio, there's not one that stands out. There's truly not one. I think the strongest one uh, that is the, s- the most difficult one, I think, to overcome cognitively is this idea that actually there is a demand for education, and education is actually a necessity in much of the world. And I think that is probably the most difficult to overcome cognitively, primarily because in the West, we have this widespread belief that education is almost this trivial thing that you do to get a job instead of being an actual necessity for living a great life. And people can read the article on my Substack. I just have a few notes up here. There are claims that you can't learn on Duolingo that I debunk. There are claims that the education market is shrinking and nobody learns anymore. There are a few facts that I cite in the article that are really interesting. One of them is that there are over 1 billion more secondary and post-secondary graduates by 2030, 2 billion more learners worldwide by 2050, according to estimations. And so this strange idea that education is a shrinking market is nothing more than a total fallacy. So to answer your question specifically, I don't think there is a very strong case against Duolingo. I think it's one of the most exceptional companies I've ever come across.
Same. I would agree with you. There's not really a bare thesis.
Yeah,
Intellectually, cognitively, the idea of humans are not just they're not gonna want to study. Um, I think that as you advance in your wealth creation journey, there comes a little bit of a point where you're like, well, my life really isn't gonna change all that much.
yeah,
Like you could be, instead of flying around in one device, you could fly around in another that's maybe private, or maybe have a little bit of a different fitting, or maybe instead of going skiing to this one place, you could go heli skiing. But I think it tops out very quickly.
Yeah.
And so what you experience as a human being, and this seems to be systematically the case, is you begin to wonder things like the meaning of life.
Yeah.
Actually, what are my hobbies? What are my values? And you really enter this stage of, and I think we both have a tendency to do this anyway, but it's you really
Yeah.
wonder, what am I doing here, other
Mm.
than just creating wealth? And so I think humanity goes to that inflection point collectively as AI makes material abundance more widely available.
I
Eventually,
agree.
perhaps as material scarcity. So, like, I mean, I think really one of the few things humanity will be left with is, and it's not nothing, it's self-actualization. Like
Yeah.
figuring out what you're doing here spiritually, emotionally, learn new
Yeah.
things, and so forth. I think then that translates into the primary job in maybe a decade or two from now, is capital allocation, because you have all this manual labor at your availability disposal. And it's all you have to do is be thinking right. That's what humanity is about in terms of prosperity and moving forward and stuff. So to me, I think education is going to be exponentially more important. You could argue today it doesn't really matter at all relative to what we're going to have in 2 decades. People now are educated to participate as sort of very linear cogs in a system, which is, we were designed to automate manual. So we basically had mechanic bodies throughout the 20th century up until now, the 21st century. Now we have mechanic minds. So education is geared right now to put you in a factory, basically,
Yep.
and have you work from 9 to 5 or whatever, and do really nothing else. So you could argue that education now is going to start to matter. It's very, very important.
Yeah. So I would recommend, I think you recommended this book to me a while ago. It was called The Sovereign Individual. I don't know
Yeah.
if you recommended that. It's an exceptional book. I read it twice. People should read that because it describes the transition away or towards sovereignty. And it outlines perfectly that shift that you described. And so I totally agree. And if you want to get really wacky, I mean, this is why, remember, I don't know if you remember in the first article I wrote on Duolingo, I kind of compared it to a digitalized Montessori system.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I said that it has the capacity to transform growth economically, but also scientifically. And that ties in, I won't go into the details now because I don't want to confuse people really, but I do believe that facilitating and nurturing that curiosity of each person is hugely transformative in relation to future economic growth and also scientific growth, of which we've been in some sort of stagnation.
It's very important.
Yeah. So
I'll just add, I think maybe you can go into this maybe a little bit deeper, because I think it's very interesting. If you look at people roughly my age, they were trained for that kind of industrial world. So industry 2.0, you could argue 20th century industry. And what happened is, when we came out of uni, financial system collapsed. And so a lot of what was considered the pinnacle of that sort of value creation process kind of evaporated, but it took time. And so it's taken roughly a decade for things to deflate very much so. So the journey that maybe some of our parents went down, which was very
yeah,
successful at the time, has now deflated. And so you have a generation which is completely, they have very futile skills. They can't really move forward. And then you have massive taxation as predicted by the sovereign individual in all of that. And you
yeah,
see some of them sort of exiting that stream in a way perpendicularly by developing skills which combine into specific knowledge, and then they become
yeah,
productive and useful. So I think maybe, do you want to explain the Montessori idea? I think it's going to be quite interesting.
yeah.
Uh,
Sure.
maybe not like a 5-hour deep dive on it, but I think we're going to be very curious about what it is and why it might be relevant in that
Sure.
context.
So absolutely. I have no notes, so I'm just kind of riffing off memory. However, the Montessori system is basically this philosophy of education that at the center holds the belief that each human person, specifically children, have innate curiosity, and that needs to be nurtured instead of being quashed. And I think the industrial Prussian system of education does an excellent job at stagnating that innate search for curiosity. And so that is the principle. The system, I believe, was created by a physicist, a female physicist, and I think she was a Nobel Prize winner or something. But she created this system, and the inference that I made to Duolingo is that I think Duolingo, at least to some degree, is a digitalized extrapolation of that vision. Now, I should note, this doesn't necessarily, this thesis being correct is not necessarily hinging upon my investment. I mean, it's more of an interesting extrapolation rather than a necessity from an investment view. But the point that I make is to keep it short. When it comes to scientific and economic growth, specifically scientific growth, one of the things, Antonio, that you realize reading these scientists, philosophers, and especially physicists, is that scientific growth does not occur through incremental additions, but rather occurs thanks to bold conjectures that are truly outside of the box and revolutionize the current paradigm and understanding of which the existing paradigm rests upon. And Einstein is a great example of that with relativity, from which he totally revolutionized the fundamental paradigm of which existing science was predicated upon. The point being there, without getting complicated, is that to advance scientifically, you need to nurture a culture and a person that is curious and can diverge from the crowd. And I think one way of doing so is facilitating that innate curiosity that every child has and allowing them to follow their own curiosity, which I believe can best be done through a one-to-one education system. And I think Duolingo is showing evidence that they may be that system that can personalize, that can adapt education to each person, depending upon also their psychological differences. I mean, some people, for instance, like me and probably you as well, are massively introverted and we much rather stay inside and speak to no one. But other people like to be in a different environment, and therefore every person has a different psychological structure, of which Duolingo ideally would be able to learn over time, and thus could personalize education to each person. And so that is just not something that can be done. You know, Mark Andreessen, you posted that video of Mark Andreessen recently, right?
Yeah.
When he was speaking about one-to-one education and how that kind of is the true differentiator between the rich and the poor, or something to that effect. And I think he was describing Duolingo exactly that. He was explaining a digitalized Montessori system that is personalized, that is adaptive, and is better, if not superior, than any other human tutor. So yeah,
So I guess what you're saying is we need to unlock specific knowledge for everyone. That
Yes.
is how industry moves forward and how we create value on top of what we've already built, I guess.
100%. Yeah.
Going back to, I just found that entertaining, the idea of introversion. I think we're both similar in that sense, but then we can be extremely extroverted when coming from conviction, which I think is funny, and relentless in the expression of ideas too.
Yeah, no, I probably, I'm very bad at small talk, and so after 5 minutes of small talk, I need kind of a 10-hour sleep or something.
Yeah.
So I'm not very good at that, but
Electrostimulation to recover. Yeah, probably.
yeah.
Right. So I think that covers a lot of Duolingo. I think if you find it appropriate, I think now we can move on to hymns.
Sure.
And I wanted to ask you, what do you make of this pill that they just launched? Just to make sure everyone's up to speed here, it's meant to be a copy of the famous/infamous Wegovy that HIMSS just launched, and obviously has sent the stock down another 102% something. So what do you make of the pill? What's your view? And does it change your thesis at all?
No, not at all. And when the news came out, I was, had a pretty relaxing day, and I didn't freak out at all. And I think, to be more specific, I think I'm not trying to judge anyone that wants to sell a stock or whatever. It's your choice. I'm really not involved. If that is what you wish to do, then go ahead. I will not be selling a singular share. And the reason I mention that is because coming into every single investment that I make, as I said at the start of this conversation, you have to anticipate the potential downsides and the outstanding debates of which may emerge. And so when it came to HIMSS, the two specific ones that I noted of concern was the blind spot that I have around the legal risk, but equally marketing spend. On the marketing spend front, I'm not too concerned. I think marketing is uniquely the core business or the stigmatized products uniquely reliant upon marketing spend. However, that's not something I'm massively concerned about. The legal risk has always been much more of a concern to me, just insofar as I don't know what I don't know. I don't know the blind spot ahead of me. However, a few points that I wrote about on Twitter that I just want to mention. I think at the core, the market is currently making three claims. there are three claims that the market is making. The first one is that Hims and Hers is deliberately or negligently breaking the law in some capacity, almost analogous to that of a cowboy operation. The second claim is that management has no coherent strategy, despite being staffed by people who have understood and worked, if not created, the FDA regulatory frameworks at the deepest level, of which now the market is suggesting they're violating. And the third claim that the market is making is that any FDA action or lawsuit would be existential and lead to catastrophic failure, if not bankruptcy. And the point that I make in the post that I wrote on Twitter about that is I think that all three of those claims are being overstated. And in my opinion, they're in there's a famous quote, "In the fog of war, the truth is obscured," firstly. I think that is exactly true in the case of the market. The truth is obscured. People were selling within minutes of the news coming out without even understanding the full context. And so the point that I would make here is that coming into any investment, there are these outstanding debates, and your job is to anticipate them. I think what shocked me personally was when people were selling instantaneously, not because I'm overly bothered about what other people do, but rather because I think it's suggestive of a poor research process beforehand. In my case, I think the legal risk has been baked in from day one. And I've gone into this investment with the knowledge of potential legal risk / my ignorance when it comes to the legality, or this so-called gray spot that people always speak about for Hims and Hers. And so to answer your question specifically, it hasn't changed anything. I'll be buying much more. I haven't purchased any today. I'm not sure what the price is at, but especially if it goes down to $15 a share, I'm going to be buying very, very heavily. And nothing has changed, Antonio. We spoke on Slack, your community, which is excellent, by the way. Everyone should join. It is really good. I do really enjoy it. I think
you're a great member of the community. I think it's a great time in the.
Yeah, it's great. It honestly is amazing. We were speaking there about it's not as if the free cash flow per share or their revenue has suddenly disintegrated overnight. If you look at the market and the participants, they are under the assumption, or they're suggesting that overnight the business has gone into catastrophic decline. And just like that, the free cash flow per share, their 27x revenue over the past 6 years has just vanished. I mean, this is totally insane. This is asinine. So yeah, I'm personally not concerned. I would like to hear your thoughts, because I think you have a very good read about the technicalities behind the business from a more biological front, which I think gives you a very unique edge here. So what do you think?
Yeah, definitely. So I have a lot of experience injecting myself with peptides and stuff. I think everyone knows, and it's been a great success. I mean, I told everyone, I think it was last week, and even Andrew chimed in. I feel like I'm 20 years old, but with like a 150-year-old brain, in terms of from reading so much. No, I'm kidding. But so liposomal is something that's very common in the world of supplements.
Yeah.
So I was saying this yesterday on the Slack, if you're going to take, for example, vitamin C or vitamin D or any vitamin, liposomal, in my opinion, is the way to go, because it maximizes absorption. So as a customer, when you're sourcing peptides and looking how much to spend on them, what you want to get out of it, really the way you're navigating the market is with the idea of the value to price ratio, which is, how much value do I get per dollar? And so that's really what the market is about. Oftentimes, however, as you do navigate that space, and perhaps you consult established physicians, maybe not in the holistic space and stuff, they don't really navigate with that equation at all. They're like, well, this is what we're getting from our providers. This is the latest thing that just came out. This is what you should be buying. And so when you see that scenario of liposomal versus snack technology, which I was making memes about yesterday, point is, well, it's almost like it's very perpendicular to the way things work, because it's so oblivious to actual patient needs, which is, well, you could demonstrate that the absorption in trials is whatever. But if customers don't like the value to price ratio, no one cares, right? However, if they like the value to price ratio of liposomal, and then they lose weight and they do it at a reasonable price, then I have a tear duct obstruction. It's so annoying. Then
That's cool.
That's what they're going to buy.
Yeah.
And so if you're already doing personalized semaglutide, because the law allows it. And so you can do it wherever, compounding is allowed by that exception. I think it was the 503, what was it? 503B, or I can't
Yeah.
even remember. It was some time ago now that I studied it. If you can do it via injections, you can just change the form factor. And so what they're doing by changing the form factor is they probably talk to a bunch of customers who are actually, by the law, allowed to receive this product. And they said, I don't want to be injecting myself, right? Can I have an oral form factor? That's all it is. But then what this actually highlights is the underlying disruption, which is a lot bigger than the potential battle with this bigger company or GLP-1s, which is really what is truly healthcare about. How do you move patients forward? What do patients actually want? And it's actually oftentimes, as I was saying, my experience is when you go into the healthcare market, a lot of times what you actually want and truly need has nothing to do with where all the billions of dollars are flying. And I think, I like to say a lot of the bare thesis for him relies on effectively believing that management is mentally handicapped. Because you think, well, if it's so dangerous and everything and so not effective, why the hell did they launch that pill? I
Yeah.
mean, is the bull thesis that customers are stupid and that's why they stay on the platform and continue to pay them? That's not the bull thesis. So liposomal is interesting, and there's a bunch of, I think, other ways which you can maximize absorption, which I think the market will catch on to eventually. But it's this idea of patient centricity is so disruptive to the entire flow of capital in the industry and the laws around it. The laws are maybe not, I think a lot of it is designed to protect patients and maximize outcomes, but sometimes it's not going to be. And sometimes there's going to be a bit of a gray area. So as a HIM shareholder, what I want is for them to explore the gray areas, maximize shareholder value, and operate according to the law. And so as long as they satisfy that equation, I think that free cash flow per share continues to go up. And that's actually what they've been doing since inception. That's why revenue is up a billion X, and so is free cash flow per share and all of that. So I quite like this scenario. And then going back to the idea of organizational traits, to me, I would have terminated my Duolingo position if I had seen Luis focusing on short-term profits.
Yep.
Instead of leveraging the possibility of creating a superhuman AI teacher. Now, what I saw yesterday with him confronting the situation as it is, putting the patient first, I loved it. It's like qualitatively, this is what I want to see. And again, as you say, there's legal risk and everything, but there's also the risk of making a billion times your money, which I think is very much on track for now. And so I quite like the scenario, although I thought that interestingly, in terms of peptides and so forth, the pill thing was a nothing burger because
Yeah.
it's basically like the injectable personalized semaglutide, but with a different form factor. So obviously, continued insanity. I don't know who is doing the selling, whether it's retail or institutionals or a combination of the two, but it signals a grave misunderstanding of the company, which is sort of where we were at with Palantir a few years ago.
Yeah, well, I wrote a post about this on Twitter today, actually, and I compared it to Palantir. I think I said to you on the Slack as well. It's actually quite strange because I respect Andrew Dudden much more now. Actually, after this, it signals profound contrarianism in his convictions and bet. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, for all I know, perhaps this could be a massive legal overstep, and it's black and white, and therefore him's a sued into oblivion. I highly doubt that is the case. But I love the case that he is utterly contrarian in his thinking and has such strong conviction. In the case of Palantir, you'll remember that I think this was before they IPO'd or DPO'd, sorry. They sued the US government for illicit and for poor contracting. I mean, could you imagine imagine what would have happened if that was, I don't think that was when the company was public. It was before.
No,
it
it
was
was
in
private.
2014.
I forgot about that. That's pretty hilarious. Yeah.
And I thought this is absolutely incredible.
I think it'd be very comical if Hims just turns around and sues the FDA or something.
And so the point that I was making there is in the post is that I view this as a profound indicator of management as to their contrarian abilities. And that's something that I love to look for in all of my investing, whether it's Palantir and the fact that they had still $3 people in the sales team. I mean, this is totally crazy. It's almost comparable. You could say the idiocy of Dr. Karp having a sales force of 3 people is kind of equivalent to the so-called idiocy of Andrew Dudham going for this compounded medication. It's like different industries, but it's almost equivalent in terms of just how insane it is compared to conventional wisdom.
No, it's
And
pretty hilarious.
nobody thought that would have worked. On the regulatory side, it simply comes down to what I've cited throughout and what you've mentioned as well. I think just delegation to the organism, understanding that the best businesses at the core are simply those of which with increasing speed and efficacy can overcome these difficult problems, and thus assessing the organizational characteristics to judge as to if this is an exceptional organism is imperative. And Andrew makes a really interesting point when he says that we're a blue chip we're a growth company with a blue chip team. This is not a bunch of cowboys as the market is currently suggesting, but rather is actually a blue chip company, which includes the damn ex-COO of Novo Nordisk and many individuals that have written the exact legislative framework of which they're being accused of going against. So honestly, I'm not just saying this. I'm really not concerned. I knew this was a risk going into the company. And if this turns out to be catastrophic, then that's an indictment of my ability to assess the capabilities and the trustworthiness of management. And that's on me. But I highly doubt that this will be catastrophic for the company. And
the way I see the odds of catastrophic outcomes here going up or down, I think it's a function of the size of your stick. So if you have a much bigger stick than the guy next to you, the odds go down. Now, Him's stick, I think, has been getting bigger. And the idea of law in this industry is not, it's not as if, 2 people were to agree on something. I think law is very convoluted in the healthcare space, especially in the US. So what I think, if the pill thing accelerates the growth of their stick in this very unique window of time in which there's an admin that's kind of patient centric and so forth, I believe that's the right thing to do. Because if another admin comes back and we get Kamala on steroids or something, it's going to be way worse. So now's the time to accept. I mean, as an operator myself is how I would look at it. Just accelerate. Obviously be focused on patients, but if there's gray areas and stuff, you can swim in it. And so long as you're growing really fast, because there's another instance, the Palantir thing is hilarious that they sued the US government. It's just incredible. Honestly, a very bullish sign. I think if we had seen it live, probably. Just imagine Andrew Dudham turning around and suing the US. But the Uber scenario was also quite analogous if you think about it. I think there was this one time, at least, I think it was in Europe and in the US at the same time. I think it was people, I don't know if it was protesting in favor or completely against Uber. I can't remember what it was. But there was a lot of noise and sort of Uber grew a lot those days. And that was a massive inflection point in the company because low-key, everyone hates taxis. Taxis suck, right? I mean, I'd much rather get my Uber Lux S-Class, push a button and know when it comes. Every single time I've got on a taxi in the past few years, I've hated it. Something similar happens on the healthcare side. I think that a scenario of this sort, apart from the odds of catastrophe, I think going down as Him gets a bigger stick, I think it could be a massive leverage play as well, because the public opinion is not in favor of the incumbents, and for very good reasons. So I think it could turn out to be just something amazing, and I don't think this management team has suicided, just at the expense of launching a pill that increases revenue a little bit. I don't think so.
Well, this is the other thing as well. And even when it comes to the efficacy of this pill that they've launched, many have been instantly saying that this is, I think someone said on Twitter, this is almost a placebo pill. It doesn't do anything. It's just a placebo. And I just thought, as someone who admittedly is not technical in the way in which you are when it comes to this industry and the nuances of this industry biologically, I think you can, I don't think you even need to be to assess the situation. The way that I've assessed it from an investor's standpoint is that what is the likelihood that a company that is obsessed around the customer over the past 5-6 years, to a degree I've truly never seen before,
what is the likelihood that in a moment's panic, they suddenly launch a placebo pill to trick their customers? I mean, it's just profoundly unlikely. It's just an asinine kind of statement. And so if I were to make a bet, and well, I am making an investment in the company, but if I were to make a bet, if I was a betting man, I would suggest that these concerns are overblown. And I don't know about you, but I even feel as if the so-called atmosphere on Twitter has suddenly died down after yesterday.
Yeah,
this massive blow up. And so there's no new story. There's no new story under the sun. These themes come and go, and the way to be emotionally resilient in such a situation is if you've rigorously researched the company itself. And that, it's like what Jeff Bezos says about I think stress. He says stress is often a function of not doing the work beforehand. I think that the same comparison is true when it comes to investing and being emotionally resilient. So I will not be selling a single share. I'll probably be buying far more as the price decreases, which I suggest. But one thing that I wanted to ask you about, because we spoke in the Slack about how medicine is moving away from being reactive and generic to personalized and adaptive. And I suggested, and I said that was truly disruptive in relation to to big pharma. But you went almost a step further to say that it almost invalidates their entire business model. And so I think it would be really interesting to hear your comments.
It does. So I find this scenario hilarious. Just two things just to add on top of what you were saying previously, which is one, collective vomiting sessions never last forever. So you can see how everyone is just exhausted on Twitter.
Yeah.
Very tired. Lots of emotions. Yesterday, lots of emotions. Now, very quiet. And what's hilarious about this is I've studied the industry very deeply, going back in time. I've looked at many aspects of healthcare. I've understood the body on a first principles basis very deeply, because in myself, I have solved a challenge which isn't widely solvable per traditional medicine. I don't want to talk about it because the algorithm doesn't. Point is, I did the same thing I did for deep dives for investing, I did with my health.
Yeah.
And so it's hilarious because many times you see the industry look at something that obviously is pretty amazing. And they're like, no, let's go down this way. Just it's much more expensive. And it's a lot, it's like a lot better margins and stuff. And it makes a lot of sense. I'm not blaming anyone. But it's just the snack thing versus liposomal is hilarious. And it's because I can guarantee you this is not the last time we're going to see something of the sort where HIMSS management effectively looks mentally handicapped because they launch something that's not meant to work. Customers buy it. They think it's a great deal. It works. They keep coming back and free cash flow per share keeps going up. There's an infinite reservoir of things which are sort of buried underneath, under the neatly tied up under the rug. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of that coming. And so on a first principles basis, there's many different lenses at which you can look at health. And the industry right now is built to address symptoms. And you could argue that's as far as science has gone until recently. You could argue many other things. There's a lot of avenues of science which have been abandoned along the way. And I've talked about this a number of times. I won't say anything specific because it's very controversial, but I've had people DMing me saying, hey, I went and did this thing yesterday and it's amazing how well it worked. And it's not meant to work according to science and stuff, and it works. So the shift that's happening now hinges on one very simple thing, which is now everyone has the information, which wasn't the case 20 years ago. So if you wanted to learn what was happening in your body, you would have to go see a guy who, was obviously not in a great state of health, smoking and fat and slow and awful mitochondria, sitting in a chair all day. And you wouldn't move forward. You would get some labs back, have no idea what's going on unless you're literally about to die.
Yeah.
And that's that. And that's how healthcare works. Now it's different. And you can see HIMSS compounding on that, which is labs. Every day you wake up, more biomarkers, quicker, more convenient. Cancer testing, I can guarantee you, going forward, we're going to see more biomarkers come up, more kinds of tests, both for cancer and whatever condition, all bundled to make it really easy so everyone has absolutely exhaustive information. That is happening outside HIMSS as well. So I'm wearing a Whoop, and it gives me a lot of information about what's happening. And so as a patient, I become the CEO now. I have all the information I need to see where my body is before, during, and after a treatment. And if you look at many sort of mass distribution events over the past few years, which this industry made money, it hinged on people having no idea of what was happening inside their bodies. Now that possibility is going away. And so just that is the single thing that shifts the power structure in the industry, even if HIMSS is not around. You just have the information, and then you have the education online. If you put your biomarkers into an LLM, it's going to be a lot more detailed on what's happening to you than the average doctor would be. And I've experienced that myself along the way. So it's a structural shift that the company is writing. I wouldn't say they're sparking it. I would say this is happening anyway. And this is a crucial time in history because a bunch of factors are coming together, which is the cost of diagnostics collapsing and then the cost of intelligence collapsing. So the two things basically make it so that eventually you can prevent ever getting sick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. So it was interesting you say that because I wrote a thesis on HIMSS for my Substack a few months ago now. And the inspiration from it came initially from an article that I wrote about Palantir probably 4 years ago or so. And I was basically describing what computation is. And I've also used the same framework in relation to AMD, another company that has just performed so well over the past few years. And the point that I want to make is that healthcare is, I think, at the core fundamentally a computable problem.
Yeah.
And this stems from and the reason I want to mention this is because this is actually applicable across all investments as well, especially Palantir and AMD, but equally for HIMSS. The universe has an intelligibility and underlying patterns and traits, and those traits and patterns can basically be comprehended mathematically. And from that, you can then specifically tune medicine and ontology to that underlying intelligibility that exists in reality. And I don't want to overcomplicate it unnecessarily, but I do believe we are entering into the age of computable medicine.
Yeah.
And it ties back to what you've said fairly religiously now over the past few years, that the network and the proprietary data is the true mode.
Yeah.
And I don't see how that shift is resistible. And so when you think about what HIMSS is actually doing, I think in some sense they're doing almost the same as to what AMD is doing and what Palantir is doing, from like the first principles basis, insofar as they can generate that data and understand that data, of which has an intelligibility, and from that then specify medicine based upon that proprietary data of which they've generated and now own from the biological structures of which have been uploaded onto the platform. And does that make sense? I don't know if I described that well.
Yeah. So I would say, just to bring that to the specific today for the audience, I think what you're basically saying, and I think this would be something plausible today, if you were to have exhaustive molecular information of what's happening inside a body and you just dump it into an LLM, I think the LLM is going to come out with something productive. And so you extrapolate that out, which is, everyone has exhaustive real-time data. You have a model that's 1 billion times more powerful. The combination is, hey, do this. And if you do this, you won't get sick. Stop doing this. And if you stop doing it, you won't get sick. Take this. And so it's an algorithm that basically keeps you alive and healthy. And that, in my opinion, is the most valuable subscription service in history to date.
Yeah.
And the same with Duolingo. Where's the end to that flywheel? Well, so long as we have the same scientific paradigm, it could be 1,000 years long. And if you have more and better data than anyone, and you're a singularity scaler in your head, you can scale for 1 billion years until the scientific paradigm breaks.
Yeah, I agree.
So it could be like not just 100, I mean, if you really think about it, in 10 years' time, what people I think are going to be caring about is health. I think money as an object, I don't know I'm not going to say it's going to disappear, but I think that the way we live it's already changing really fast.
Yeah, I think that the point that you've made in the past about material abundance and the abundance of that of wealth and resources, meaning that people will want to live longer and to be healthier, I think that is true. And so I'm very excited about this company. It hasn't changed my perspective at all. if I'm wrong, then that's a indictment of my research abilities beforehand. And that, I'm okay with losing my money in that case. It's on me. It's not on anyone else. It's on me. And
Well,
so, yeah,
just to add to that, I've been saying this lately, but some people, they jump on the internet and they see us and they're like, well, every single pick has to work for the endeavor to succeed. And that's what you have a portfolio for. By the way, not many companies. The objective, you could say, is to beat the market. And if you walk into a hedge fund, they have like hundreds of
Yeah.
mathematicians and PhDs and stuff, and they don't work. It doesn't work most of the time. So I think in a portfolio, how many do you have now? Is it 4 or 5 or something?
5, yeah.
5. In a portfolio of 5, if just one works exponentially, then it's a success. So I think just to make it clear to everyone, we play the odds of that happening. No, it's not like, because I think some people do watch a video and just, put like their last paycheck into a stock, and then I think a portfolio is important. But as you say, I think that the fundamentals are doing beautifully here.
And one other thing I'll say is regarding the Palantir investment, because I think that a lot of people fail to appreciate the complexity and the countless outstanding debates that were present at the time. And people look now as if it was just obvious.
Yeah.
But there is no such thing as obvious. If it was that easy, then everyone would be a billionaire. It
Yeah.
is actually very difficult. And in the case of Palantir, I said this before, but a sales force of 3 people, which was unheard of in the software industry, a CEO who was profoundly iconoclastic and an outsider who went against every convention, an organization that worked only with the West and refused to work with China or Russia, and a very strong mission-driven organization called the black box a consultancy. All of these narratives propped up. But what it ultimately came down to in the end was as to if you believe that the organizational traits, the caliber of the organism was strong enough to overcome those difficult problems with increasing speed and efficacy, is the way I like to frame it. And I think likely that the same thing is going to happen with HIMSS. And so we've had this obsession around GLP-1s like never before. I mean, you can get the specific stats up. I'm sure you know from memory in terms of the GLP-1 business and how that equates to their total revenue. But there's this belief in the market that this is only a GLP-1 company, and that they are entirely reliant upon this new drug. And when it comes to the analogy that I explained earlier in terms of the hot bubbling stew, the cancer therapy that they've recently launched, that new vertical, would someone have anticipated that specifically a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? I highly doubt it. And so you just have to give this company time. I've made my bed, and I will be holding this company for the very long term, unless something profoundly changes in the thesis fundamentals, which I highly doubt. But yeah, I'm very confident, and really, that's all I think about HIMSS. It hasn't changed my thesis at all, the recent news.
Well, so far it looks like snack technology hasn't had a major impact on the on the fundamentals. So, anyways, I think that was a great podcast. I'm sure there's many more to come.
Yeah.
I hope everyone enjoyed this. I remain very bullish on these 2 companies too, and I'm enjoying the discount, especially in Duolingo. And really, I opened the podcast saying I hope I can buy that company at $1 per share or something, and it would truly, I mean, I've never experienced this myself to this degree, which is a company fundamentally growing exponentially and the price decreasing exponentially. So the combination of those 2 curves truly produces mind-boggling numbers. Right? Like, how many shares you could buy at $5 per share versus 500 is extraordinary. So I think a declaration of intent. I make jokes about giving up and stuff, but no, these 2 companies convictions. We have fun with that, and I'm hoping I can catch it at a very, very low price. So I'm looking forward to that. So Christian, that was amazing today. I had a great time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's so great to speak to you again. And we'll have to do this in 2 more years and see how we've done.
For sure. I'm looking forward already. All right. Have a good
Cool.
one. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
everyone. See you soon. Bye-bye.